All right, welcome to another episode of Critical Weight Theory, and this time I've got a little bit of a movie review. I'm talking about a movie that's less of a film and more of an experience, and not always a pleasant one. It's Movie 43, one of the strangest, most infamous comedies to come out of the 2010s or the 2010s. If you've never seen it, here's the basic idea. This is not a normal movie with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Instead, it's a collection of short, disconnected comedy sketches. Each one has its own cast, its own premise, and its own level of chaos. It's an anthology movie, in other words, and that's usually better done in horror movies, though there are definitely some lousy anthology horror movies as well. And I guess I kind of, you know, said my thoughts on the movie already. This is kind of a crappy movie overall. Um, Movies like this, like movie 43, they're basically a mixed bag. It's not that I hated this movie all the way through, but like a lot of the critics out there, I definitely did not thoroughly enjoy this one. And this was my second time watching it. I was like, you know what? I'll give it another try. Maybe I will enjoy it more this time. And I'm going to get into what my favorite sketches are, like the two of them that I actually thought were all right. And I'll let you know why I think they actually work. So there is a framing story, kind of. In one version, it follows a guy pitching increasingly ridiculous movie ideas to studio executives. And in another version, it's completely different with some stupid, annoying kids. And, there are some vaguely funny moments in that wraparound sketch, but it's mostly just annoying. And the fact that there are two different versions might tell you how loosely this whole thing is held together, and I guess that's part of the idea. The movie jumps from one sketch to another. There's no real continuity, no shared tone, just escalation. And, it's usually kind of intentionally offensive. And that's what's supposed to stand out about it the most, I guess. The cast is also honestly shocking. That's why it stands out. You've got people like Hugh Jackman, Kate Winslet, Emma Stone, Holly Berry, and Richard Gere, among others. Big names, award winners, serious actors, and they're all in this. I don't know, exactly how they managed to get them in here. I've read up on it a little bit, but still, I don't know to what extent these stories are true that I did look up. The humor, it's got a lot of shock value. It's crude, awkward, and deliberately offensive, like I said. And the movie really just goes out of its way to push boundaries, sometimes just to see if it can. And that's really some of the annoying aspects of this movie, really, that it's a little too deliberately offensive. And some of that kind of humor, I think it can be great, don't get me wrong, but it can also grate on you after a while. And if the movie is not particularly good, well, it'll just fall flat. And one of the most talked about sketches is actually one of the ones that I actually enjoyed the most. It's called The Catch. It involves a blind date where Hugh Jackman's character has a very noticeable physical abnormality that he never acknowledges in a normal way. And I'll just leave it at that. It's actually not that bad of a joke. It kind of reminds me of a Kids in the Hall sketch or something like that. So this segment did not totally, I guess, turn me away from the movie either the first time I watched it or this time. It was reasonably funny. It's a sight gag kind of thing, and I didn't hate it. And there's another sketch, Truth or Dare, starring Holly Berry and Stephen Merchant, and that one just has them, playing a game of truth or dare on a date, and it keeps escalating until it becomes just completely absurd. That's actually not that bad of a sketch. Um, it's not one of the ones that I dislike the most, and that's really a thing to say. When it comes to a movie that I'm criticizing. Um, there were like three sketches that I actually thought were all right. Some of the other ones are just basically either not good or they just are trash, and I just wanted them to get over with already. That's part of the pattern here. Every segment tries to top the last one and how far it will go, and it's chaotic. Part of the reason the movie feels all over the place is that it literally is. Movie 43 was not directed by one person. Multiple directors worked on different segments, each with their own style and their own tone. Well, I mean, it does kind of have similar tones throughout the stories, but it's definitely a little bit disjointed. So the movie ends up feeling inconsistent, like you're flipping channels between very different kinds of crappy comedy, I guess. It's almost like a what if experiment. What if a bunch of filmmakers all contributed to the same project without a strong central vision? And what if each story is basically like, I don't know, just a trashy joke, And this movie is the result of that. As far as like the critics versus audiences, the critics absolutely destroyed this movie. They hate it more than I do even, and I kind of hated some of the stories in this movie quite a bit. We're talking overwhelmingly negative reviews. It's often listed among the worst reviewed major films ever made. Now, again, there are a few stories in here that I think are okay, and there's even one story that I think is kind of great. But it's a mixed bag. If you have watched this and you like all the stories, then hey, that's great. That's fine. I'm not gonna bash you for that, but it's an iffy kind of experience. The movie even picked up multiple awards at the Golden Raspberry Awards, including Worst Picture. Audiences were a little more forgiving, but not by that much. Some people see it as so bad it's funny or so bad it's good, but it's not good in a traditional sense, but entertaining in a potentially chaotic, what am I watching kind of way. Others just find it exhausting, and I was somewhere, you know, in the exhausted territory throughout much of my viewing of this film. And the real mystery is, why did anyone agree to this? This is where the story gets a little bit interesting. The movie was filmed over several years, apparently, and a lot of actors did not sign on all at once. Some were convinced through favors, some reportedly didn't fully understand what they were agreeing to. You almost get a sense that maybe some people were kind of bullied into it or blackmailed or something like that. I don't know. Because it does have some people who normally might not be in a movie like this. Maybe they wanted to, in some cases, expand their audience, prove that they could be in this type of film. I suppose there is an appeal to doing that to prove that you're not just one note. Like if you're sort of pigeonholed as being a serious actor or something, you might want to have something like this in your repertoire. And you can say, look, I've got movie 43 on my resume. How about that? And there are stories of actors trying to back out after realizing what the project actually was. Richard Gere, from what I understand, was apparently stuck due to contractual obligations, which sounds like fun. And actually, his segment is like particularly crappy. I mean, uh, I guess the only thing you could say about it is that it objectifies women. There's like definitely some female nudity going on in that sketch. So I'm not gonna lie, I do appreciate the female nudity on the screen, but it's a crappy story, and it's literally about objective like that sort of thing. It's a bizarre sketch, and if you have any sort of conscience at all, you might be like, "What the hell am I watching here?" It's like on the one hand, it's like intending to appeal to the audience, but it's like deliberately repulsive at the same time. It's one of those kind of things, and I think it's trying to play a clever trick on you or something like that, but it ends up just being like, what am I seeing here? And it wasn't particularly, let me enunciate that. It was not particularly entertaining, and even at the time this movie came out, like if you wanted to see some nudity, you had other more I guess better ways of doing so, like because pornography existed at the time that this movie came out. So if that's really what you're going for, and you could check something like that out. But this movie, I don't know, that sketch and a lot of the sketches in this movie, they're like trying too hard to be crass, and I don't want to sound like a prude or anything, but like it just gets old after a while. It's like they're trying too hard. And I'm not really that much of a prude. I enjoyed Beavis and Butthead when I was younger. I used to watch that plenty of times, and stuff like that. And like I said, I'm not necessarily turned off by female nudity on a screen. I'm not one of those people who's like a rabid feminist who's always railing against the male gaze on the screen or whatever. That's not really me, but it was a little ridiculous, that Richard Gere sketch. And that's part of why this film has a weird reputation. It almost feels like a prank on Hollywood itself and on the audience. And it's like someone asked, "How far can we push this before people say no?" And they just kept on going with it. So, as far as the box office, despite the star power, the movie didn't do that well commercially. It made about $28.8 million dollars on a $6 million budget, which sounds pretty good until you consider the marketing and the expectations and really the sheer star power involved. You would think that those big names would really make a lot of money, but I guess the word got out that the movie is pretty crappy overall, and people, they responded accordingly. And here's the thing, though: over time it's developed a small cult following. There are people who genuinely appreciate how bold it is. Not good necessarily, but they consider it fearless. In some ways, I think the movie was kind of playing it safe, though. Like because this kind of humor, it was definitely more common back then. And, it's not like it truly rocks the boat in a truly meaningful way. It's not really that fearless. It commits to the bit no matter how uncomfortable or ridiculous it gets. So I guess you could give it credit for that, but it would have been more hard hitting if the stories were better and funnier overall. And in a weird way, the crappiness of the movie also makes it memorable. So, should you watch it? It really comes down to taste. If you like edgy, anything goes comedy and don't mind crude or uncomfortable humor, you might find parts of it funny, as even I did. Even though I'm criticizing the movie pretty harshly, I found like three sketches reasonably funny. And I guess there are 14 sketches in total. So, not even half of it was good for me. And if you prefer structure, clever writing, or subtle humor, this is most certainly not for you at all. So, did I enjoy it at all? Of course, like I said, yes, I did. I liked actually three segments reasonably well. The Catch, the one that I mentioned, and the Truth or Dare one. And then there's a story about an animated cat named Beazle. And I thought that was actually pretty funny. And, you know, it's it's still like an offensive sketch, but I thought it was. I actually laughed. I gotta admit during that sketch, I thought it was pretty good, and that's really what I think is redeeming about this movie is that it has Beazle in it. That's one of the reasons I would not include it in my top list of crappy movies. I don't know if it'd be a top 10 or like a top 25 list, but that sketch alone actually would probably keep this movie off of that list. So, movie 43 is less a movie and more of a curiosity. It's uneven and often hard to sit through, but it's also kind of fascinating, not because it works, but because this movie exists. And sometimes that's enough to make something worth talking about or even checking out. Maybe you would like this one. I don't know. I probably won't watch it again, at least in the near future. Maybe I will include it on a list article type of episode if I ever start making those. Um, but I probably won't be watching this one for quite a while, to say the least.